Happy New Comic Book Day, geeks, and welcome to issue 61 of the Script Heroes podcast.
The show where we bring you comic news, book reviews, and industry blues. My name is Joseph Jasonowski, and I'm the writer of Janitor Hero, Cutting Carly, and the Cryptoverse.
And I'm Katie Markham, scripter of the Rusty Robot Country Club and ghostwriter extraordinaire. We have a handful of great books to talk about today. We've got TMNT number 6, Rome Eternal number 2, Murder Kingdom number 3, and The Body Trade number 4.
And if you enjoy any of those reviews or anything else in today's episode, you can follow the pod on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all to handle Script Heroes Pod. Or you can find me personally on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram at JJAZ1111.
And I'm on all the same socials at Katie Markham Pro.
And now, let's move into the news. Okay, so we are going to be continuing to some extent the news from last week. We're going to continue to talk about the Diamond bankruptcy and kind of the ripple effects that we are already kind of seeing happen across the industry. I'm going to kind of ramp it up in order of like I think impact and end off with maybe the more positive one out of the things, because I think that's going to be a decent way to handle it. I don't know. The first one is more of a making official and expanding of something we already knew. We had heard that Antarctic Press, through statements that they had given to various news sources, was going to be stopping accepting any new creator-owned books for the time being. Antarctic Press has now put out a full statement, and I'm just going to read the first little bit of it, because there's then some clarifying stuff that I can summarize much more eloquently than the giant blurb that Ben Dunn talks a lot. I think we've definitely talked about this off podcast before. Guy is great, worked in comics for a long time. Not brief. Not a brief man.
No. Very enthusiastic.
But I'm going to read the first little bit of the sentence of the statement, which is: Antarctic Press has had to make the hard choice to put a freeze on all anthologies and creator-owned titles as of February 1st. This will affect any comics not already solicited. So, essentially, the expansion here is they are not just putting a pause on accepting new creator-owned books, they are stopping all creator-owned books. And that is also including what I think is maybe the thing that is most unique about them, their monthly anthologies that they've done for however many years that have been, I think, one of the easiest ways for new creators to get into stores through, like Exciting Comics at Planet Comics and Manga Z. So the clarifying that then happens is that this does not include any of their owned titles, things like Ninja High School, Tomorrow Girl, etc., and any crossovers with those characters that might involve creator-owned characters will still be happening as well. But that's kind of our first thing here. It goes from what we thought was going to be a pause on new creator-owns being accepted to the complete freezing of all creator-owned titles through what I think is probably, along with Band of Bards, the easiest or at least most open to new creators creator-owned.
Which is deeply rough. Like you can't really fault them for it if they don't have a distributor that they can trust. It's hard to do that, and I appreciate that they're, referring to it as like a freeze. They're not like, clearly it seems that the intent is, at least to me hearing this, is to unfreeze them when they find a distribution path. Yeah,
whether it's a new distributor, but the rough thing is I do think they're having issues with the two other distributors not wanting to pick them up. But then the other thing is if Diamond does end up being sold, that can be, I think that's what a lot of people are hoping for at this point, because that is like the almost get out of jail free card of like, okay, we don't have to reorient the entire industry here. Like a buyer's like, we can maybe keep things going. But
the point of Chapter 13 bankruptcy is to try to like save the business itself.
Yes.
Like it's a restructuring thing more than anything, I believe, with the big bailout. So fingers crossed that a resolution happens soon.
Very much so. But to make that less likely, we have what is going to be, I think, a major blow here to Diamond, which is that Mad Cave Studios and Vault Comics have both now quit Diamond Comic distributors. So I think people saw Mad Cave coming from a mile away. They were the biggest publisher that was still at Diamond, at least fairly. Yeah, I guess Image was too, but Image pulled out immediately. So
right, yeah, that was
post
still at Diamond.
Yeah. And they have now just fully both pulled out, moved over to Lunar. We talked last week about Vault doing their direct thing, so that'll be, I guess, in addition to Lunar now, instead of in addition to Diamond. So that's
I mean, that's kind of a good news, bad news thing. Cause like bad news, they're pulling out of Diamond. Good news that Vault did get into Lunar. Like they're not a huge publisher, so being able to get in with. We've talked before about how Lunar is kind of picky with who they let distribute through them. So it's good that they seem to be open to bringing in smaller publishers. Mad
I think
Kid's
it's
kind
going
of
to
a
be a very
no-brainer,
pick and choose thing, which is interesting. And that's the thing. You hit on it. It's the double-edged sword with everything, where it's like each time this happens, you're like, oh, that another publisher is safe even if Diamond goes under, but you keep going. But every time this happens, it's also like, oh no, Diamond is more likely to go under every time one of these big publishers pulls out, because the odds of them being able to not only but like find a buyer, survive, whatever it is, with only the small press publishers. Like at this point, I think Dynamite is probably the biggest thing they still have. And I am sure Dynamite is trying to find somewhere else.
Yeah, and the spooky thing with this as well is, everyone's moving over to Lunar, which is, good for every person that gets in. But if Lunar falls, then it's just
not
kind
even speak that over the world.
I mean, I would just say we're truly putting all the eggs in like one basket.
Which is kind of what happened with Diamond.
Yeah, but at least there was this second basket that people can move to. We're kind of losing our backup here.
No, that's very true. But now we're going to go to what I think is one of the more it's similar to the Antarctic thing, but with a bigger like property or a bigger publisher, which is what makes this somewhat concerning to me, at least a little bit. But I think we had talked on the pod. We had talked at some point, whether on the pod or off the pod. I'm sorry if it was off the pod, and you all are going to have no idea what the hell we're talking about. But we had talked about Valiant. Valiant has done a lot of interesting things recently. They're coming out through Alien books now instead of making their own books. That we definitely talked about. But they kind of saw what was going on with the Absolute universe and the Ultimate universe and the Energon universe, and they were like, bet we want our own, simplified continuity to try to, bank on the hype of this and do a new thing. So Valiant Beyond was set to launch very soon. I believe it was set to launch for March this year, which is literally next month.
Yeah.
And Valiant Comics has now, with the Diamond bankruptcy news, decided to postpone their Valiant Beyond launch for the time being. So I'm going to read a little bit of this statement. So the statement is, luckily what happened with Diamond found us at the best worst case scenario. We had already decided to publish fewer books during November, December, and January because we were working on launching the Valiant line with the Valiant Beyond initiative, which was scheduled for March of this year. We also have new licenses we haven't announced yet, and we were planning to do around March/April. While the distributor owes us money, we haven't received payments since December. I believe we'll be able to reorganize and move forward. Even though the money owed to us is essential to our operations, we're working to ensure it doesn't become critical. This will require restructuring the company and reducing operational expenses to sustain this project. Clearly, this will come at a high cost for us, as we'll need to move some books around on the schedule until the market stabilizes. Meanwhile, we're focusing all our efforts on crowdfunding campaigns and launching a new online store. So that's I wanted to hit there because that's the very interesting part to me, is where it's like Vault decided to do the direct thing, and it seems like Valiant is going to try to move more direct to consumer, at least until things,
as opposed to direct to. So I guess with it's Valiant. They have a lot of clout in the comic space, a lot of history, and a lot of Kickstarters do like the retailer tier thing. I
Yeah.
wonder how much they're going to lean into that, if they're going to be like specifically courting shops that have held their books before, being like, hey, we have this retailer tier with Diamond, yada yada. If you want to buy directly from us, here's how to do it.
It's interesting because I think the retailer tiers are much more common from like really small publishers and like
Mhm.
creators, because so much of that's like on the honor system, and
Right.
big publishers don't really want to deal with the like, oh, what if a consumer just buys a boatload of books at half price? It's like, we
Right.
don't want that. So it's certainly an interesting question, but I'm interested to see, like, does this mean that Valiant Beyond is going to become a crowdfunding thing? Does this mean that Valiant Beyond is just going to be direct and they're going to do their normal books here? Like, I don't know what that means. If the online stores just, if they're just going to take the books that were going to be sold direct and just plop them on the online store without any like pipeline. I don't know.
Mhm.
I'm very interested to see how this plays out, but I think this is one of those things with Valiant had been doing at least somewhat decently since Alien Books started publishing them. They had this
Because
big initiative.
they
It was like
restarted their universe, didn't they? Like a year or two ago?
uh I think even less than that. I think under a year ago is when they started doing all the books through the resurgence of
Mhm.
the Valiant universe is what it
Yeah.
was called. I think it was less than a year ago. It might have been just about a year ago. Because I do think I was still in Binghamton when that started up. So um, but just about a year. And then they were going to do this Valiant Beyond thing, which who knows if that would have worked out. Who
Right.
knows if Valiant could have sustained two universes. But it was another thing that maybe could have caught the way that the Energon universe did and the way that all these things did. And that all that stuff was good for the industry. And so seeing
Yeah.
something like this, and not to mention the fact that just looking at like Valiant was doing a bunch of like one shots and little things like these things, and it was employing a lot of like mid-level creators, a lot of coming up creators, and it's really sucks that those jobs are going to kind of dry up
Yeah.
for comic creators here,
At least for now.
at least for now. Or maybe they'll just
It's
be
my
Kickstarter
optimistic
opportunities,
spin.
which is, just different.
It's yeah. And that's the big thing, is that I think that there are kind of two spheres of the comic community. I'll say three spheres. There's like the big two. There's the quote unquote indies, I guess the big five. And then the indie community, and then the kind of Kickstarter crowdfunding community. And whereas before those felt like kind of three different spaces, uh,
They're starting out.
they're starting
Yeah.
to come together, which is a bit of a bummer because it feels kind of like the comics world is shrinking a
Yeah.
bit.
I'd agree with that. But just to maybe end on a slightly more positive note before we go to the big-ish more positive news that I'm going to cap us off with, I did just decide to click over to Alien Books' Kickstarter.
Mhm.
The current Kickstarter they're running is at $37,000 with 600
I mean,
backers
yeah, for
with
sure.
9 days
That's
to go. So
phenomenal. Yeah.
that's nice to see, at least that
Mhm.
they are getting the people on
Yes.
Kickstarter. So hopefully that will be, at least as a holdover, something that can keep
Yeah.
them running,
Yeah.
something that can keep creators, going. I think the big thing with Kickstarters is just the fact that like you don't really get to run multiple at the same time, so there's no way they're going to be able to put out the output they were putting out,
Yeah.
But it's a slight nice thing to be like, okay, at least their Kickstarter's doing
Yeah.
well. But let's end on a slightly more positive note for the news here.
All right. What you got?
We're going to talk about spam, which I know doesn't sound positive, but basically a small press publisher called Cosmic Lion Productions has started to toss around this idea with other small press publishers called spam. I'm going to read you the statement here, or at least the second part of the statement that talks specifically about spam, and then we can talk about kind of what that means. So, that is why we are proposing SPAM, Small Press Are Mighty, a collective of small publishers and companies to come together under one umbrella to make the process simpler and more attractive to distributors, while also being easier for retailers to navigate and search. It's a great idea in theory, but we can't do this alone. We're looking for publishers who want to join us in making this a worthwhile offering, so reach out if we don't get to you first. Most importantly, we're looking for distributors who will give us a chance if we make the grassroots effort to pull people together for them. And we kind of then get that Tyne Hunter, who is the Penguin Random House director of comic market sales, seems to be interested, according to Bleeding Cool, at least. Take that how you will. But
do we know what that interest looks like? Like, was it
not.
liking a tweet? Was it?
I think it was expressing it to Bleeding Cool. At least that's the way they seem
Interesting.
to
Okay.
frame it here.
I
They say that they've been there for 10 years and they're interested in quote unquote bringing the right people together.
okay. All right.
So
Do we know who's joined under the spam umbrella?
not yet. I honestly we don't know if anybody has joined them yet.
Okay,
It could
yeah.
just be Cosmic Lion, you know.
Doing the grassroots.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting idea, one that I think has a lot of promise. I think only off pod we've before talked about the fact that the demands from distributors are not necessarily sustainable for every small comic company. So banding together is a way to kind of meet that threshold. I am curious about what that would look like for the individual publishers, like identity, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like if they're all together with spam, are they going to be like spam comics with this publisher, this publisher, this publisher?
No, it's a very good
or
question.
Is it going to be like exclusively a business side of things? So on the shelf, it still just looks like Mad Kit, or I mean, not Mad Kit, but
I think that's the smarter way to handle it, because otherwise I think you're going to struggle with trying to convince people to buy as many books as there will be from like the same collective thing, especially people who aren't in the know. But at the same time, maybe that can make them look bigger. It's like, oh, you got all these books on the shelf from this thing. Maybe they actually do matter. But certainly it's an interesting thing. Like I'm guessing that there are going to be other publishers interested. Like the publishers right now that are pulling back or not even doing basically. I don't think Band of Bards is doing anything direct right now with the Diamond concern. So like I would bet that those publishers that are struggling to get meetings with Lunar or Penguin will want to join up. But I think you need the like slightly higher tier to also join up for this to be attractive. Like I'm thinking like you're gonna want your Red Fives, you're gonna want Valiant, you're gonna want, if you can get Dynamite in there, you want Dynamite in there. But I'm guessing Dynamite will be able to sell themselves on their own
for
merit.
Sure, yeah.
But like those are the publishers that are a little bit bigger and are still out there. Zenoscope, like those are the ones that you want to get under this. I would assume if you want to make it an attractive sale not sale, but like pick a package to Lunar or Penguin. But it's certainly I think it's going to be a little bit of a battle to get enough of the small presses and the big enough small presses to all sign on to this thing, because in theory. Somebody's got to be in charge of this thing. Something like there's going to be all this stuff you've got to get in there, and getting what I'm guessing would be like somewhere between like 20 and 40 separate entities to all like agree to whatever this is going to be a juggling act for sure.
Absolutely, but it's an exciting thing to see cropping up.
Certainly,
very excited to keep an eye on it.
But yeah, that's our current state of the Diamond bankruptcy. I'm sorry that's not always a super positive update. I'm hoping one of these days I can tell you, like, Todd McFarlane bought Diamond Comics, Diamond Distribution, and everything's gonna be fine. Like I would love that to be one of these news updates one of these weeks. But until that happens, tweet Todd McFarlane and tell him to buy Diamond. Until that happens. I think we're going to be in this state of publishers figuring things out, and I hope that they all do. But it's time of change in the comic book industry right now, and that's going to be interesting.
And frankly, a reminder to buy indie comics, get them from your comic stores.
Right now, I would look at any publishers that are doing like Kickstarters and stuff. Like you can, or their online stores. Like find ways to support these publishers that aren't through Diamond. Not that you shouldn't still buy the books through Diamond, but if you can support the publishers in other ways too, when they are maybe not actually getting the payments from Diamond, that would be good.
Yes. It's all about community with comics, and we gotta make this community look the way that we want it to, which means supporting small creators.
Absolutely.
There we go. A positive
This has
spin.
been your news update, or your what is it called when like you do that, like the thing like in the middle of a TV show where they go like
PSA.
yeah, thank you.
There you
This has
go.
been your comics PSA with
Yes.
Katie. Thank you. I was not going to remember that. Okay,
Time
but
to talk about
yes,
some comics themselves. Let's head
do
over
it.
to the pull list review.
Okay, we have the smallest week in a little while now. Only 4
Yeah.
books this week. We're going to be talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #6, The Body Trade #4, Murder Kingdom #3, and Rome Eternal #2. Both of those, the physicals were delayed. The digital copies exist, so we were able to read them online.
Yes.
But yeah, hopefully we'll have physicals soon. But in any case, Katie, that's not all we picked up this week. You've actually picked up your books, but you picked up so many books. You are still going to be reading off of a list here to see what was actually this week, I believe.
Yeah, the past, like 4 or 5
I think you got
episodes.
5 or something like that.
Yeah, I had just not made it out to my comic shop because of the holidays and stuff. So I have no idea what in that giant pile of books is from this week. But it looks like I think the only thing in there is Dick Tracy #7 is my only non-pod book this week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wild.
Crazy. What'd you get?
I got...
Well, it's not that wild. It's a week 5.
Oh, that's true. It is a week 5. It's interesting that we had 4 like existing books on a week 5. That doesn't always happen. Got, of course, the Eastman cover of TMNT as well, because got to do that. Got Green Lantern 19. Got Turtles of Grayskull issue 3. And then I got 2 copies of Last Ronin Re-Evolution issue 4. But that's all I got. I'm gonna crinkle to make Katie upset as I put these away.
He knows I hate the crinkling.
Yeah. But yeah, do you have an order for the 4 books that we do have? All different publishers, I believe.
I believe so as well.
Two Mad Cave.
Oh shit, you're right. I think we start with the Turks, go to Rome, then Murder Kingdom, then the Body Trade.
Sure, let's do it. Yeah.
TMNT #6. The Turtles are back together, on the run, and at one another's throats. Navigating a New York City that used to be their home, but is now a hostile territory, the 4 brothers try to get things back to normal. But Donatello is deeply scarred following his captivity. Will the 4 brothers be able to rally, or will they find themselves at the mercy of the Foot Clan? The writer here is Jason Aaron of Thor, The Avengers, and Wolverine. The artist is Juan Ferreira of Batman and Robin and Green Arrow, and the letter is Sean Lee. Jay, we're moving into the turtle meat of the Turtle book.
Yes, we are. They are back together. They were in the sewers for a little bit. They're in the shadows. It's a very they're going against. It's a very meat and potatoes TMNT issue. I feel like it's like, okay, we're here. This is what the Turtles are. Like, enjoy this. And there's a nice there's no. We've talked about this with a lot of the DC and Marvel books we've been reading recently, where it's like there's no hand waving of like the stuff that came before. We're gonna not touch. It's very much like, oh, we're gonna start there and go to where we're going. This feels very similar. Like, he mentions Mutant Town, but he gives a reason why they can't go to Mutant Town, so they don't have to kind of do stuff with that. Obviously, Splinter being dead has been a huge part of the book, and that's obviously coming with what came before. And Donnie was deeply unsettling in this issue,
in the best way.
And it builds. I don't want to reveal where we're going to get to, but it builds very nicely to what, because I think that's really like your internal arc in this issue, along with like kind of the external stuff. The Turtles are like a little high key on the butting heads, which I think for a first issue together is fine. But I also like that it is acknowledged that that's not like how they were when they split up. It's acknowledged that this is by far the worst they've ever been. So again, it's all Jason Aaron is very cognizant that he is existing within a long running Turtles thing while also trying to do his own thing, which I think is very nice. And then Juan Ferreira just kills it with all the action and
Oh
emotion
yeah.
in this book. It's very we have, I think for the first 4 issues for the one shots, we had a lot of like very stylistic things that fit
Yeah.
the style needed for each story, and then just like there's a very meat and potatoes turtle issue. Juan Ferrer feels like a very meat and potatoes turtle artist, where we're no longer like, oh, we need this style for a Donnie book, or we need this style for a Leo book, or we need this style for a Casey book, and it becomes just like this is going to be the style for the Turtles book moving forward, and I like that a lot. So yeah, it's a little bit of like a like slow down issue to like get us together before I think we really are going to start running with the plot. But I think it was really, really good all together. The emotion of the turtles was really, really great, and you get a lot of characterization in this issue that I think is going to kind of inform how they are as a unit moving forward.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to hit on because, again, as you all probably know by now, I haven't read that much Turtles, or engaged with that much Turtles, but I feel like in the same way that the single issues were really great kind of starting points for these characters, this also was a really good starting point for the characters' relationships with each other. Like, in the way that they interacted with each other in this mostly hostile manner, you
Yeah,
get a lot of great like relationship establishment. Like we see the way that Raph and Mikey are like aggressively butting heads. We see that Leo is trying to like keep everybody on task and together, but is also, in I think a really well written brotherly way, susceptible to falling into like the shut the fuck up mindset as well.
yeah, yeah.
And poor Donnie, my boy Donnie, oh my god.
The moment of Leo being like, "Well, Donnie, guess once again it's just got to be you and me to be, to hold things together," and then he just looks at Donnie like losing his mind, and he's like, "Right, just
It's
me,
just me.
got
And
it."
I'm like, that's why Leo's my favorite. I love that boy. That turd. Um,
Never
but
sounds right.
I'm here to burgle your turds, man. I don't know what to say. But the arc for Donnie through this issue is so well written. The way that they kind of, because it's borderline comedic, while also being like horrifying. Uh, but they do a really good job with a couple different like moments of like track being laid, and then the train just runs over them,
Yeah,
and it's really great. uh Jay Star did a really great job with that, and like you're saying, Juan Ferreira's art is phenomenal. I think he gets a lot of really good like kind of turtle grime going on.
yeah,
Like any I feel like a good indication of like something being a bit grimy for me is when people draw individual teeth, and there are a few really good like punch moments where you see like all of the turtle's teeth, and I'm like, oh, visceral. Yeah. uh and I'm like, that is my least favorite thing in the world, but it's really effective. uh Teeth freak me out. But yeah, I think this is a really great issue for like reestablishing not only who these turtles are as their own characters, but who they are as a family and as a unit. And without giving anything away about it, I really liked the meta narration that was going through, and I
yeah.
think it had a really good payoff in the end that has me really excited for what that could have going forward.
I agree, and that's another thing. I didn't touch on when I said it because I don't want to spoil it. But that's another thing that's very much like, oh yeah, the way that things worked in this like long running series before Jason Aaron took over is still gonna matter, and it's still a thing, which is nice.
Love it. Yeah. But yeah, really great issue. Do we know how much longer Jason Aaron has on it? Wasn't his time getting cut short?
No, I think
Oh,
he's
never
just on
mind.
the book.
Were we just worried it was going to get cut short with the?
I don't know. I think we talked about it some because the thing that changed was the artist. Juan Ferrer wasn't originally supposed to be the artist who was going to go ongoing. I believe it was one of the artists that did one of the one shots was originally going to also be
Gotcha.
the ongoing artist. I believe back all the way back when this was first announced
Right.
as happening, and then that changed at some point, and Juan Ferrer became the artist who was going to actually be like an ongoing artist on it.
Gotcha.
And I think we'd had conversations with like some of the IDW stuff about like unsure about how things were going to go,
Mhm.
but it does seem like Jason Aaron's just here for the long
Great,
haul.
because he's doing a really good job. Excited to
He
keep
is.
reading it.
Yeah.
But are we ready to move over to Rome Eternal?
Let's do it. Rome Eternal, Issue 2. Step into the moment of glory. The Mystery's mission to assassinate the Emperor is planned to every detail, each member with an important role, yet none can anticipate the high cost this will bring. Meanwhile, who is the Emperor's mole inside the group, and who's supplying them with information? Treachery and action are always in fashion in Rome Eternal. The writer is Homero Rios of Heavy Metal. The artist is Diego Yapur of Frank Frazetta's Dawn Attack, Lollipop Kids, and Sun Eater. The colorist is Osco Carino, and the letterer is Sean Lee. Katie, talk to me about Rome Eternal.
I think that we talked when we talked about the first issue about how strong the aesthetics are in this book.
Oh, yeah.
And that very much continues. We see more of
in his bag.
We see more of these like really cool kind of future tech fused with Roman armor things. Like my favorite is I don't know that he had it because I'll jump to that in a second. But the guy who in my brain I was like, he looks like Ares. So you know, the Mars guy in the big red metal armor with like the super cool sci-fi hammer. Or I guess it was a mace.
With the pommel and everything.
Yeah, that was so rad. A lot of the visuals of like Roman centurion armor, but then having a gun, I love it. It looks so cool. They do such a great job of blending the kind of historical with the sci-fi, and it looks really, really, really cool. This issue it really succeeds in the way that first issue succeeded. It struggles a little for me in the same way that the first issue struggled, where I feel like I feel like I kind of stepped onto this and was whisked away immediately. Where it's like, okay, everything is moving really quickly, and I still haven't quite gotten my feet under me. There are a lot of characters introduced in this, which means a lot of really awesome Diego Yapur character designs. But it also means a lot of people to keep track of, and with the high cost hinted at in the blurb there, it's also I feel like I didn't have enough time to really connect with these characters in a way that made me like super worried about them. Or
I think we do the like Kirby splash how I got here thing. I think you can spoil that if you want to.
That's so fair. Yeah. So one of the big characters that they introduce, who actually gets a little bit more kind of time on the page to establish herself, she dies, and I'm just like, I kind of appreciate the Kirby splash to be like, okay, I'll pay attention to her. I know that she is like important to the story, but then there's like 8 people around who are all going on this mission, and they all feel like they're meant to feel very important. And I don't really know who any of them are, which is a bit rough. There's there's a big reveal at the end, which feels really cool, but I feel like again I don't have like enough context around it. It's odd for a book that I'm pretty sure is completely original for me to feel like I'm like, oh, is this like, should I have read a novel or watched a movie to like really understand what's going on here? Like, is the shorthand of comics kind of excluding me from the story a bit? Like we noticed with I think it was when we talked about the Percy Jackson adaptation, where it's like a lot of this relies on you knowing what happened in the book. Yeah,
because they would jump over things. So I think you're pretty on the nose with this book. It's something where like in issue 1 I was very like, oh, issue 2 will maybe expand, we'll start to figure out what's going on. It feels like, I think we talked about it in one of our creator corners at some point, where it's like sometimes people have like a Bible or like a whole world figured out, and then as they start like putting some of it onto the page, they don't realize that some of it needs context that people won't have, or that people don't know everything that they know. This feels very much like a book that's like that right now. It's like, I want to know so much more about it because it seems like they have this awesome world figured out, and it seems really, really cool and exciting, but there's characters constantly everywhere. It's hard to actually like focus on anything. It gets confusing, and that's a little disappointing. To me, it feels like it's really, and I'm sure there's a way if they were able to pull back and say, okay, we're going to focus on just this or just this. It's one of those things where I think for the amount they want to put in it, miniseries doesn't work. and that's what I'm guessing
Right.
the problem
Yeah.
is here, is that they, instead of deciding, okay, we only get a mini series, we have this huge world and huge story we want to tell, instead of going like, because of that, we'll focus on this little thing, and then if we get more, we'll do more. Instead, they went, we're going to try to pack all of that into this mini series, and that becomes very hard to follow. This feels like a book that would have been really nice if this could just like start and they could go, okay, we're going to give you, the mystery story here, and then we're going to focus on this, and then we're going to find out 6 issues in that there's a mole, and we're going to start playing with that. Like, it feels like something that if it had that slow build, it would be so, phenomenal. And there's still a lot that I love here, but it's just, it feels like way too much packed in here, which I think is especially unfortunate when I think Diego Ypur is doing such a phenomenal job with everything. The action, these like big war sequences that feel Roman, like Centurion,
right.
like it's such a good,
like the movement of troops is so well done.
I love it. And then we talked about the characters. Every character design in this is phenomenal. The mix of, because it's alternate history, so like the alternate history present tech or future tech is so cool.
So
and
rad.
I really, really love it. And there's even like, I like a lot of the, when the dialogue is not trying to tell us a million things that they want us to know, I really like some of the characterization in the dialogue. But it's just, the book's trying to do so much that it becomes very bogged down.
Yeah, I think we talked, I really love when, because a lot of these characters will speak in kind of like this Roman affect, and I love when that gets mixed with like a fuck. It's so good. It's like the dialogue equivalent of the blending time periods, and it's really effective and cool. But like you said, when it gets to be cool, it's really cool. When it's not trying to deliver a lot of information.
There's just there's some great stuff in here, and I wish that it had more room to breathe. Yeah.
Are you ready to talk about our next book, which is Murder Kingdom number 3?
Let's do it.
Murder Kingdom number 3. Who will be the fairy tale serial killer's next victim among the cast members of the Storybook Kingdom theme park? Prince Charming. Yes, his name is Prince. Prince Charming. Yes, his name is Prince of the Queen's Guard. Joelle, the Littlest Mermaid. Jamar, aka John Henry, the Steel Driving Man. 2 of the above? All of the above? Princess Detective Tanith must save them by exposing the masked killer in time. The writer here is Fran Van Lente of Marvel Zombies, Amazing Spider-Man, and Iron Man. The artist is Chris Panda of ROM First Strike, Micronauts, and Transformers, and the letter is Becca Carried. Jay, you read Murder Kingdom.
I did. Yeah.
As did I, to be clear.
Yeah.
How did you enjoy it?
This is an interesting issue because things start to kind of like, I guess we get more of like Tanith actually detective-ing, and we start to like actually figure things out. So like we kind of get our lead into, I have no idea how many issues this series is, so I don't know if the next one's the final issue or if there's one more after that. But in any case, I liked a lot of that. Like I really liked, we get a like kind of Mickey Mouse parody. It's called like Oswald, I believe, like Mickey Mouse parody cartoon thing that shows one of the fairy tales. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was cool. And then I liked the like connection of each murder to one of the Oswald things. I really, really liked that.
Love it.
I thought that was very cool. And then we end the issue in a thing that I think is really, really cool. I really like the ending to the issue and kind of the way that the tension ramped throughout this issue, which I think is something that especially issue 2 kind of struggled with out of this series, actually like ramping up the tension in a way that was followable. So I really enjoyed that. I found myself a little less in love with the dialogue in this issue. It was very on the nose, especially for certain characters. Like they leaned really hard into this like Gimbo thing at one point. Which is Ginger Bimbo. Interestingly.
Do you think it's a Jimbo then?
No, it's like the GIF thing. So you change it based on what makes sense for the word. No, I don't know. But some of the dialogue was a little rough. There's especially, and there's a reason for it because it kind of gives Tanith like a moment of realization, but it still was just so heavy that I was like, I think you could have done that a little more subtly. But overall, I thought this issue worked really well for what it needed to do. It set up again, it set up like Tanith figuring things out and starting to actually get in place, and then
Mhm.
we get a really good, like, five, maybe. How, did you say how many issues it was? I'm sorry.
5.
5. Okay, what I thought was going to be kind of a final wrench in there, but maybe but we get another like derailing or point of tension if you watched last week's episode that's going to keep Tanith from getting to her
Mhm.
goal or actually helping people, which I thought was very cool.
Yeah. I also really like this issue. Uh, I I think that it's really ramping up now. Like you're saying, that we're
Yeah.
doing more kind of investigating and exploring. The tension of Tanith almost getting killed in the previous issue was really fun, and I think that this is a really good next step from that. Of like, okay, now we're learning more about the killer. I
Yeah.
also I agree that there were a couple points where the dialogue was a bit much, but I liked the framing device of, instead of like giving us the actual, like, I don't know, movie script or something from the
Oh,
old
I like
Girl
that
with
a
No
lot. Yeah.
Hands. Yeah. I like that we had one of our modern characters kind of almost sassily describing what happened. It felt like a really good and natural way to give this fairy tale, which I
It was
do you
full
know
TikTok
is,
summary.
yes, yeah.
Oh,
Which honestly worked super duper well. Um,
absolutely. I said that. I see that with
yeah,
love, not for TikTok summaries, but for the way that this book employed it.
yeah. I love that this book, it feels so like it really does feel like good time capsuling. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, you can read a book and be like, "Oh, this
very
was written
Gen
in the
Z.
'90s. They said this." This feels like, "Oh, this is a 2020s book," and
Yeah,
I really appreciate that about that, because I feel like we don't have a lot of. Most books are kind of ethereal in that way,
yeah,
where it's like it could be written in 2002, it could be written in,
yeah.
2045. But I think that this is a really good, like, kind of capturing of a time period, which is great because the characters are like teens of the time period, and doing teens is always, I think, the best way to communicate culture, which is phenomenal. We love to see it. But yeah, I'm super excited to see what's going on here. This really
Me
did
too.
invest me more in the kind of mystery of it all, and I
Yeah,
like
this
that
is I think where the
they,
mystery really started
yeah.
getting some legs to it because we
Mhm.
actually started like looking into things or like figuring out things that weren't just like
Mhm.
murder, go to murder, you
Yes,
know.
yes. So very excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, agreed.
Are you ready to talk about my one physical book this week, The Body Trade?
The Body Trade, issue 4. Kim wakes handcuffed to a hospital bed. His reckless quest for vengeance has finally caught up with him. An old friend arrives to deliver some devastating news. He's dying. But if Kim so chooses, he can donate his body to science. The writer of the series is Zach Thompson of Blown Away and Into the Unbeing. The artist is Jacques of In Hell We Fight, Gold Key Mysteries, and Duster, and the letterer is Hassan Itzman. Allow. Katie, talk to me.
This book is so good. Like, I every time we read this book, I'm like, oh shit, hell yeah! Like,
Yeah.
this is a book that'll make the boys say hell yeah. Um,
All my boys love Body Trade.
Me and my boys, we all love The Body Trade. It's so cool. Kim's character is so fucking deranged. Like, it's really phenomenal. This man has, like, it's amazing how he both has zero concern for his, like, body and health, but is also, like, deeply needs to self-preserve so that he can find his son. Like, it's a really great, I think, showing of his character, where it's like he keeps trying to get himself killed, basically.
Yeah.
Like, the stupid things
He
that he
wants to die
does.
on a revenge quest, you know? It's like
Exactly.
there's nothing left for him. So if
Yeah,
he dies on this quest, then like great.
then great. But he also he doesn't have a death wish or anything. He's just,
No.
like, so single-mindedly determined that he's like, if I walk into a situation where I'm fighting a man with a gun, then I'm going to go and punch that man with the gun because he's in my way. Like,
Yeah.
there's this man is so ready to just lay it all on the line at any given moment in this book, which is super great for like the stakes of the story because we see him get like badly hurt. He woke up in the hospital on this
Yeah.
one. It's a really great character to be following, especially because we've talked about it before. The like intrigue and interest of his own reliability is so great. Like,
Oh.
I don't think he really tries to contest that he's the reason his son is dead. Like he
No, and we
tries
finally
to
kind of get more on that here.
mhm. Which is so cool. Uh and it makes him such a wild character because it's also like his son is dead. Like it's
Yeah.
and he's not even like going after the company anymore. He's going after the person who has his son's body parts. And so it's like, what is your end game, dude? Like when you get to this guy, are you gonna rip his eyes out of his head so that you can bury them? Like what I don't Kim is so driven by this like single-mindedness, I need to save my son, but there's no son left to save. And that is so cool.
I feel like that gives that puts so much of your point just right
It
there.
really does. He's so wild. And we had great combat in this one. I love the way that the combat
Jacques
resolved as
was
well.
fucking
I
going
feel
off.
like during that sequence, Jacques was at his most like at his most Mignola that I've ever seen him, and I loved it so much.
Yeah.
It's so cool. But I will stop talking because I've talked for 3 full minutes. So you should get a turn.
Yeah, this I'm not gonna touch on because we've talked about every issue, the stuff with why Kim's. I'm gonna touch on why this issue specifically is so great in the series, which is we actually finally get some clarity in this issue on several things, which is very nice.
Mhm.
But we don't get everything. We get flashbacks to the incident of
Yeah.
what led to Kim's son's death, but actually also gives us a lot of context on Kim as like who he was, what he was doing. That's great. He also looked very different, which was very interesting to me. And then we also get a little bit more like on the organization. Things start to become a little bit more clear there and what's going on a little bit on that front. So it makes a lot of sense for the penultimate issue where it's like, okay, now things are kind of coming to focus. We still don't know, like you said, what the hell Kim's gonna do when he gets to this man, if and when he does.
Mhm.
But the picture of like what has happened in this world is a lot clearer. From like issue one, where we're like, we don't know if he's just a crazy guy who like kills his son, to now it's like, okay, we kind of have a better picture of what
Mhm.
has actually transpired to get us here. Which is very nice.
What
But
I'll say is I'm not convinced that the flashback we see is Kim and his son. My little theory, I think it's Kim's dad
you
and
think it's
Kim.
Kim's dad and him?
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think we're gonna get a really great issue 5 where we really explore what happened and like how Kim became the way that Kim is. Because like you said, he looks dramatically different. Uh
Yeah, the thing that I thought was supposed to like indicate to us that it's still him, but I guess that is that like he kind of still has the facial hair, the same facial hair, just less grown. But it's really not super clear.
mhm.
Uh, because it's like it's done in the like little lines way instead of like
Yeah,
drawn
like
on.
I think the the aesthetic of it is very much like Kim and his son. But I think that it's going to be like a turn on its head a little bit because I think that the son looks very much. So I think we
The
saw him in
funny
like
thing
the
is,
photograph.
I went the opposite way. Where my initial thing was, I was like, oh, this must be Kim with his father immediately because I didn't think it looked like him. And then when I
Mhm.
saw the scenario, I was like, oh no, this just makes so much sense to be how Kim got his son killed. Um, but I'm very interested to see how
Yeah,
that plays out. But
me
in any case,
too.
it's showing that Zach Thompson is going to reveal things. He is
Yes.
starting to put things in place so that when this series finishes, we don't walk away with like that was great, but I also have no clue what actually happened. He's like,
Mhm.
you're gonna get things, I think, here once everything kind of happens, which is very nice. And Jacques was really in his bag this issue. We get
Oh
I
yeah.
don't want to spoil what happened. There's like an alligator crocodile thing. If you read the book, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And it
Yes,
is amazing
it
and fucked
is.
up and
It
great.
is.
And I love Jacques. This art is phenomenal. And it's a lot of just like and it's what makes the body tree work so well. Like it's not like important action. It's not like big action. It's
Mm-hmm.
very like more grimy action of like, I'm just gonna try not to die. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
like ninja kill you. It's like I am trying to not die and probably make you die. And
Yeah.
like that's how the action in this book feels, and
Like
it just fits so
I
well.
don't think there's been a fight where Kim hasn't gotten like stabbed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man is constantly bleeding.
He's constantly bleeding. And you know what? He probably wants it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah,
Agreed.
so good. But that takes us to the end of our pull lists for the week, which
Wildly.
means it's time for the pull list rec.
I didn't even think about this yet. I'm
I
not
did.
giving this thought.
Would you like me to go first then?
Yes, go first. I am. Oh, go first.
I mean, I'm giving mine to the Body Trade issue 4. It's so phenomenal. This entire series is really, really great. And this has a lot of, we didn't even touch on the like his contact at the company, and I say contact meaning the woman whose car and office he broke into. She's the one who comes to tell him that he's dying and asks if he'll donate his body to science, and he's like, no, fuck you. And she's like, they have my kids, and he signs, and it's like such a raw emotional moment where I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my god, what great like kind of really low-key world building that just does so much good for the story.
Yeah, agreed. I'm gonna follow suit. We're gonna do a joint pull list recommendation for the Body Trade issue
Hell
4
yeah.
here. I think it's hard not to give it to this issue. It's just like everything about it is right. Like there's no weak link in this issue. There's no I wish this happened. There's no I want this to be slower or faster. No, like this is just what you want out of a penultimate issue of a series. Like it is so perfect in that sense. It
Absolutely.
gets you right where you need to go. It's got the action. It's got the emotion. It's great. I really think you're missing out if you're not reading the Body Trade, and I think you absolutely need to start picking it up. And if you were, hesitant, if somehow you read issue 3 and went, I don't know if I'm going to pick up issue 4 or not. Pick up issue 4, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, super super good. But that means it's time to go to another place. This is not a lead into what we're going to be talking about in the Creator Corner. That was just a really awkwardly fumbled transition.
We're going to talk about travel stories.
Because it is, in fact, time for the Creator Corner. Here we are in the Creator Corner, where we sit back, relax, talk about some things, give, hints about the things that we're going to talk about later that'll then become the main thing we talk about in a future episode.
Foreshadowing? Is that what we're about to talk about?
A little bit. It's a bit of a companion piece to the previous episode, because that always happens where I'm like, this has made me want to talk about something else. Points of tension, we talked about the little bits of a plot where these heads can butt, but we were trying to avoid talking about the larger plot where conflict is happening, where the like main point of tension is, and I want to talk about something that we've talked about, I think, most of the times when we've talked about Void Rivals, which is layering villains. So I think that this is something that works really well when you're looking at a longer story. Like if you're doing a miniseries, you're probably not layering villains. Yeah. But it's something that I think is also, to an extent, being done in The Moon is Following Us, where you have the like villain that they're fighting right now, and then the greater villain behind that. It's kind of the concept of the BBEG in a thing, a big bad evil guy who's like kind of, the real threat going on. But we've also talked about that with Void Rivals, where we have the first point of terror with meeting the pig man, being like, oh geez, he's scary, and now we have this new kind of external threat. To be clear, those are both side villains, but as they kind of.
Well, I think that's the thing that makes Void Rivals different than like your typical, and like Kirkman books in general. It's not really like, oh, here's the villain we're dealing with, and then there's a big villain. It's like, no, there's a bunch of villains that are just
that's
different.
what I'm saying. There's a number of ways that you can layer villains with each other. So I think the first thing to look at is, why would you want to have multiple villains?
Yeah, well, here's I think the number one. Well, okay. I'll give you the first. I'm sorry, because I always I go shit on my thing. And I'm like, actually,
No,
this
you're
is
good.
the
You're good. You're
slight
good.
hiccup. So I'm gonna start with the like first reason of why you want a like big villain over your little villain, and then I'm gonna talk to you, and then I'm gonna add on to that why the Kirkman. I'm gonna call it the Kirkman method. I'm sure somebody did it
Sure.
before him that he stole it from, but that's he's who I steal it from. So that's
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
the Kirkman method of like having multiple at all times. So
Mhm.
the reason you want your big villain building up while you're dealing with whether it's your weekly threats or smaller threats is because it makes it feel more important when you eventually get there. It doesn't feel like same. It doesn't feel like every issue has like a villain that's this big of a threat, and then we go, and that's dealt with, and then again we have this big of a threat. It feels like when you get there, there's this bigger crescendo, and it makes people
Mhm.
care more, and it adds to like a feud between the characters if it's been built up, if they fought multiple times, like you get all that extra tension and build
Yeah.
and payoff. Now, the reason the Kirkman method is so great compared to just doing that, stopping, doing smaller ones, going up to another big villain, is because what happens when you do, and again, this is if you have something really long running, because otherwise you
Mhm.
can just beat your big villain and call it a day, you know?
Mhm.
When you have something long running, a lot of times, and I think you see this a lot in TV, you'll go from like this villain that you've been building up to, and they have this amazing feud with the main character, and then you beat them. And then when you try to introduce the next big villain, people are like, "Why should I care? They don't have that feud." And they're like, "Well, yeah, but it took 2 years for that other character to get that feud. Like, give it time." But people don't want to because they expect it to feel the way that
Mhm.
the last one felt at the end at the beginning. When you
Right.
do the Kirkman method, you can get there because by the time you blow off the first one, the second one's already been around for 6 months, and so
Right.
people are more invested in that, and they weren't upset at the beginning because they still had the first one to be invested in, and that builds up, and then by the time you get to blow that off, you have two other ones that are starting to
Mhm.
build and come up, so people never feel like they've had that full release and there's nothing else for them to care about.
Mhm.
It also it prevents, and this is the kind of like business side of it that might be rough for fans. It prevents easy exit points. An easy exit point is like, oh, they blew off the big story, I maybe don't need this book right now, I'm gonna
Mhm.
drop it now. When it's like, oh, but we're only halfway through this, I'll just stay until this one blows off. It's like, well, now I'm invested in this one, well, I'll just
Yeah.
stay until this one blows off. And then there's no easy exit point when all these stories are overlapping and you have all
Mhm.
these threats building up.
Yeah, I think from a narrative point of view, the one of the big benefits of the Kirkman method as well is it doesn't feel like you're just shitting on your main character, where it's like villains are just in a queue
Yeah.
waiting for your main character to defeat the previous one. Because especially when you're talking about like kind of big, big villains, it's like okay, if you're doing your your mini boss essentially, it's like I understand why the character behind them was waiting in the queue because it's like oh clearly my underling will deal with that.
Yeah.
Uh, but then once you defeat like the emperor, it's like okay, the next villain can't be above the emperor. Like that's
No.
then you're just in a
And then
non-satisfying
when all of a
cycle.
sudden your world conqueror comes, it's like, why did he come at the exact time that you defeated, the emperor? Like that doesn't make sense. Like why didn't he come? What would have happened if he came 2 weeks before? You could have dealt with both of them. You
Yeah.
know.
So it really works to uh, make it feel like these other plans are already in motion, especially I think, and this is a really big deal, when you're going from your first big villain to your second one. It's so important because your first big villain is probably, we talked about this months ago when we talked about writing villains, they're probably going to have, like you're saying, that feud, this connection to the main character that's like probably tied to your main character's main story because it's the first big story of your book.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have them really tied together in this emotional way. So if you go then to your next villain, it would feel, I don't know, really really convenient, or perhaps even like you know inane for them to then be connected on this way again. So it gives you a really good way to say, oh, and now our main character who has defeated this villain ends up like running into this already in progress,
Yeah.
evil plot that we've already had the seeds being laid for. So it doesn't feel like it's coming out of nowhere that this other thing is going on. So that's another really great benefit to the Kirkman villains. That's a couple good reasons to have multiple villains. One, because you can build up to that BBEG at the end of your game. I'm sorry, I'm letting the D&D in me get away with it. At the end of your arc, BBEG is just such a classic D&D term. And then with these villains kind of circling around in the peripheries, you get that good groundwork laid for them, and you get to keep people invested in the next coming plot, even before they've known to get the main character invested in that plot.
Yeah.
So there's a couple ways that you can do it with that as
Yeah.
well. What do you think is the most effective way to build to like your Darth Vader of characters, where it's like, yeah, this is like our I shouldn't have made a Star Wars thing. I really regret it immediately.
Yeah.
No.
No,
Oh God.
I'll jump in it because I
Thank
think
you.
that there's really like how you make your biggest of bads comes from like, again, there's all for long running stuff because everything's gonna be a little bit different. Like when it's tighter, it's just like,
Mhm.
okay, it's gonna be the big villain. Like you're not really gonna have this like, okay, who is your Reverse Flash, your Joker, your
Mhm.
Sinestro, like the one who is the one compared to
Yeah.
everybody else, you know? And I think your recipe for that is you look at like the two kinds of big villains that I think you should have in a long running thing: the personal villain and the huge threat villain.
Mhm.
So there's the personal villain is the one who's going to get real personal with your character, whether it started personal or they've just run into each other so many times that it becomes personal. Now the villain's more obsessed with like taking out your character or doing something like that. It's this like close, tight one where it's like I keep wanting to use example of like I'm gonna do something that Katie doesn't have, but I'll talk about Invincible here, where it's like in Invincible, Angstrom Levy would be your personal villain. Like, yeah, he has big exposure, but most of his stuff is focused on Mark because he thinks Mark ruined his plans and fucked up his head and all that shit. So he is obsessed with Mark, and so that is your tight like obsession villain. And then you have your big existential threat villain, which is the Viltrumites, who want to literally conquer the planet. And that's this big, threat of like, oh, this will, destroy the universe. And that's your like
Yeah.
big threat. The way that you land on your like number one biggest villain is when it's both. When they
Mhm.
are both that huge conquering like existential threat and they are also incredibly personal. So you go, I'm going to jump to Ben 10 because I always jump to the same two references. I apologize. If you want to understand this podcast, read Invincible and watch Ben 10.
Of which I have done neither.
Yeah. Whereas
So
like
dear
Ben 10
listener,
has
we're in
this
the same
close,
boat.
yeah, he has this close personal rivalry with Kevin 11, who's like, also young in his age, and he has his powers, and so you have that, and that's your close personal relationship, like close villain, who's that. But Kevin's not really gonna, at least in the classic series, Kevin's not really gonna, destroy the world. Like he doesn't have that ability. And then you have stuff like, why can't it? The Highbreed, who want to conquer the universe, but like they don't really care about Ben. They just want to conquer the universe. And then you have Vilgax, who's Ben's like number one villain because he is both trying to steal the Omnitrix, which is literally on Ben, so they build up this incredibly personal feud, and he's also a world conqueror. So you have like it's together, and that's how you get your number one. So
Love that.
it's you have your two puzzle pieces, you get them together. That's how you get your Reverse Flash. Maybe I should have done a Flash thing. That might have been more
That's okay. That's
understandable
okay.
for people.
The important thing is my Star Wars reference. The reason that I immediately tried to bail out of it is because I
Is you
realized
realize
that
the
I was
Emperor?
asking the wrong question by using
Oh,
Darth Vader as my.
because
But
the Emperor is like the actual big
yeah,
villain. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So the real that's why I immediately bailed because I was like, no, no, no. I'm trying to ask how you write your Palpatine. But
So
all good stuff
yeah,
to hear from
yeah,
about just writing villains in general. But when talking about having a villain who's kind of like the not the mini boss, which feels degrading to call
yeah. The
Vader
main
a
boss.
mini
Yeah,
boss.
that's what my answer. Yeah, that's my answer.
Well, I'm specifically talking about one who has like underlings essentially. Like
Oh, okay.
when you're trying to get
Gotcha,
to that
gotcha,
big
gotcha.
villain, what is the difference in making that villain who's like sitting on the throne and the final showdown is going to be with them for like the fate of the book? And then dealing with their kind of like, step downs, so the roadblocks to get to them. How do you both make
Dragon Conquest? Got it.
Is
I
that
just jumped to Invincible. Yeah, I just
I was
jumped
gonna
to
say, is that also Invincible?
yeah. No. I'm joking. I'm not actually gonna go there. I'm not gonna. I'm gonna not go anywhere. I'm just gonna talk generally because I guess I could talk Star Wars, but I don't think the Star Wars method actually works
I'm
if you're not
sure
Star
it
Wars.
doesn't, because I'm bad at referencing Star Wars. I regretted it immediately.
No, just because like the Emperor is like I think such a unique thing of like product of time where it's like oh, and then like once you have the prequel trilogy, then it like really starts to be there. But I think generally, if you build up this extremely personal feud with like one villain and then kind of just at the end pull him out and go, there's actually a bigger villain. 9 times out of 10, I think that's gonna not work at all.
Mhm.
Star Wars, it worked perfectly because of the way that it had the way that it worked out, the way that it was personal, because you could then have Vader turning back to the light side. So it worked because of that. Generally, I don't think what you want to do is wait kind of that long to make the switch, if that makes sense, because you need that time to build up. Because again, not every villain needs a personal feud. I think there is something great about just big, giant threat. When it is your absolute biggest threat and you're getting to the blow off of like your whole thing, I think there should be a personal element to it. And that doesn't have to be, I killed your father. That can just be, you've been the fucking pain in the ass trying to stop me for the last 2 years, and so now things are personal, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that generally the way that you want to go, if you're going with underlings, and specifically I think like other big underlings is how you're asking. You're not asking like, oh, they have like some foot soldiers that are
Exactly.
gonna...
No. We're talking like
They have like another level of villain beneath.
like I'm talking the first villain that we meet is this like, seems like the really big villain, but they've got this villain above them. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, I think that you need to give yourself time from assuming you want to defeat, because you don't have to actually defeat the first one. There's a cool thing about your guy not even being able to fully defeat the first one, but just like kind of stop them from doing what they wanted to do or something like that. I'll give you my because it's such a thing. Like, I don't think there's one way to do it, but I think the main way you have to do it is giving yourself space for that big villain to then actually be front and center and get that feud. So I'm going to give you just out loud something that I think is a cool way to do it. You have this big villain. We'll call him, I don't know. I don't have anything in my head, actually. Big Jim. So you're fighting against Big Jim.
You're
Big
fighting
Jim,
against the newest addition to the Dogman universe?
Yeah. Big Jim. He wants to blow up the planet. He wants to blow up the planet. And he's utterly kicked your ass every time you fight Big Jim, because he's this alien dude and he's got so much more power than your hero has. But your hero has like a team or whatever. They've outsmarted Big Jim. Big Jim is kicking your dude's shit in, but while he does that, your guys are able to disarm the bomb or whatever. So he ends up leaving. He has to regroup, but he very much still won the fight. He's very much still more powerful than your main character, but he failed his mission. This pisses off your big bad, who says, that's not good enough. Your big bad kills Big Jim and then comes out, and then you have your audience going, wait a minute, Big Jim, who our guy was never even able to beat, was like a fly compared to this guy, who is now showing up pissed off and like doing the Thanos, fine, I'll do it myself, type thing. That's a buildup of like, oh my god, this character is more powerful than the guy we were already not powerful enough to defeat. We're fucking screwed. Now you need a plan as to how they're not fucking screwed that isn't just, he digs down deep, and even though he couldn't beat the shittier guy, he's gonna beat, you need like actual, run up there.
Yeah.
Something like that. Something that gives us this space and this time to make it feel important. And then again, you wouldn't just have him show up and have your hero defeat him right there. Like, give more struggle, give more, time for this villain to feel like the villain and not like somebody, because even if they're more powerful, if they're just pulled in and your audience was used to seeing this like 1 versus 1 thing, they're gonna be like, no, this isn't the story we were here for. So you need that runway. I'm sorry, I rambled for a bit there.
No. I think it was good rambling. I think that you hit on a couple of really great points there, one of which is that runway, which I think is so important, because whether they, defeat, convert, chase off, kill, whatever happens to like your kind of first level of boss to
Yeah.
then get to your big boss. I think that it in any situation where you're swapping out your villains, you do need that down breath.
Yes.
Where it's like, okay, maybe they've like hidden away in a safe house and are strategizing. Maybe with the guy they defused the bomb and the guy went back to his mothership, maybe they think the day is saved. So like they have a beach episode type thing where it's like, okay, we're letting them relax a little bit. We're letting the kind of tension ease so we can start to build again. And you very much can do like an immediate rebuilding of tension, but I think that requires a much more immediate payoff. We talked about the way that you build tension last week, where like the longer you draw something out, the bigger that payoff is going to be. So
Yeah.
if you're introducing an even bigger, even badder villain, then you want to be able to draw that tension out again. So you
Yeah.
don't want them to defeat the one guy and for your other guy to just drop right there onto the battlefield and say, "I have spawned in.
No,
Fight me
no,
now." And then
absolutely.
they win because that's just not fun.
Yeah.
That's not giving the proper gravitas to that new villain.
Your reader's just not going to be able to buy into that when it's that sudden of a switch, or I guess not switch, but like replacement.
Exactly, because it's like, okay, then why whatever strategy you end up using to defeat this guy, why couldn't you have figured that out with the other guy? I'm
Exactly.
like, yeah.
Exactly.
So you really need that bit of runway
Yeah.
to go, and I
But
think that
yeah.
I think
No, I
another
just
important
yeah,
thing
yeah, yeah.
here is that you're just like with the kind of periphery villain, which we'll jump to in a minute. You should be laying the groundwork for this big guy. Like
This
maybe
is
your mini boss, we have like multiple scenes of them kneeling and like doing status reports to a shadowy figure on a throne. Maybe we see them, snap someone's neck evilly
yeah.
to show that they're like even worse than this other guy. If you want your big bad to feel bigger and worse than your little bad, you have to have that going beforehand.
Fully agree. That's
Yeah.
where I wanted to jump to, because the runway doesn't have to start when like the last
Mhm.
one ended. Again, just like the overlay.
Yeah.
Let's like I'll go with something that I think everybody, or at least most people, will be able to understand a comparison to here. Let's talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender.
I was gonna
Right?
say
Like,
we can't get through a creative corner without talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender.
because it's just it's such Avatar is like something I would tell any writer to watch, because it's like such basic but well done
Yeah.
storytelling that
Hmm.
like is very easily applied and followed. Like it is
Hmm.
a such a good like lesson in writing if you watch like it in that way.
Yeah.
But like the Fire Lord is always there. I think we don't see him until like the beginning of season 2 or the very end of
Hmm.
season 1. But he's always like known. You know, he's always been talked about. And we start with Zuko. Zuko is kind of converted, kind of not really fully converted until late, but he gets to the point where he's no longer like a threat. We get Azula plopped into his place. That's actually like the start one, plop the next one in, but we know that she's worse. That's
Hmm.
one way to do it. Then the Azula Fire Lord works in tandem, because the
Yeah.
Fire Lord's always there. We're always trying to get to him, but we can't get to him. And Azula's there, and they struggle with Azula constantly. So the fact that we know he is so much more powerful and so much is terrifying. That
Yeah.
whole, and then it's not like Azula's defeated and they go to the Fire Lord. Instead, we get like a branch thing where they both
Mhm.
exist at the end, but on like different levels.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes a lot of sense to be like, the Fire Lord's always there. We know he's the big bag the whole time.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean our group doesn't have to deal with Azula. Like they do. And
Right.
that I think is such a nice way to like give the runway without, having to then defeat Azula like at the end of season 2 and have a whole season.
Mhm.
It's like, no, we don't get her until the final episode either. But because the Fire Lord was always there, it's not like, oh, we don't see the Fire Lord. They go to Azula, they defeat Azula, and now it's like, now Almighty Fire Lord. That would feel lame. We'd all be like, oh, okay, but they beat the person we actually care about. Like, who
Mhm.
cares if he was super powerful? But he was always there. So
Yeah.
you get yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a very important part, and it's important for that periphery villain too. What do you think are some strats for building up a villain who's not directly interacting with your main plot? The kind of classic Kirkman vibe.
Yeah. There's like there's a lot of different ways you can tackle it. The one is, basically essentially following them as if they were a protagonist. Like, I think that's the thing that people do, and it works pretty well. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, we're gonna, they need to, they need to conquer like 4 kingdoms in order to like do the like Orm from Aquaman thing. I think it was like 7 kingdoms he had to conquer or whatever. It's like, okay, show us him like getting several of those kingdoms under his control across different issues. Give him like 4 pages in each issue, whatever it is. It's like we see him conquering a kingdom in each of them. We see people begging for their lives. We see him being cruel and awful. And while our main character is not really even cognizant this is happening, we're getting worried for our main character because we know what it means for them. And then finally, when they conquer like that second to last kingdom, and the final kingdom comes to the hero for help to stop, everything from falling under their power, we go like, oh shit, we just watched this guy like run through 6 kingdoms. How's our hero going to stop them from getting the 7th? And I think that's very effective. That's not you don't have to follow them as a protagonist. You can have like your character keep coming upon like destroyed cities and being like, what is going on here? And have people be like, it's the, it's this monster. It's this, it's this gang leader, whatever it is. Like, you can have that too. You can do it in all of these different ways. The main thing is just make sure that you are getting across their basically their menace, I guess, is the way to do it. Like why we should care, why we should be worried or excited or nervous about this thing.
Yeah, so I this is going to be a little bit of a subjective and kind of froofy question. When do you think in plot 1, I'm not going to say arc 1 because one villain can have multiple, arcs to defeat him. When during that first plot do you think you should start, as like an avid Kirkman reader, do you think you should start dealing with introducing people to this arc 2 villain? Like, I'd say with Void Rivals, we've kind of, in the past 2 issues, started to really get a sense of, her name isn't Cobra. That's the bad guys from
Cobra Commander is the G.I. Joe thing.
But her name is something like that.
It's something like that,
It's something like that. The last 2 issues, we've gotten them coming in. And, who knows how far we are from the actual conclusion of...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, the Kirkman thing is the rough pieces. Like, Kirkman is often not introducing the villain for the next arc. He's introducing the villain for, like, 4 arcs from now. Or, like, a villain who's gonna, essentially, if he has an arc villain across, like, 4 arcs, he might have a villain that's just, like, they get one piece of their story in each arc, and they'll blow off in the 4th arc as well, Like, he is very often there. But I think typically you can go as soon as, like, issue 2 or, like, point 2 in your thing. Like, you have the setup. You can introduce something in that second bit, because that's this might anger people. In my opinion, if we're looking at, like, a 4-issue or a 4-point, like, thing, I think point 2 is actually the least important of those points. And so I think that's where you can do some interesting stuff. Here's where they can fight a little, random bank robber villain and deal with their personal issues before we get to the ramp up and finale of the arc. This is also where maybe they come across, this guy who's going to end up having a really personal feud with them, and they interact for the first time. And then in the next arc, maybe, in the second thing there, they come back upon this person and whatever. Or maybe, you're just going to have a little tease of like, okay, it's issue 2, they're going to come upon a destroyed city, and then in the second arc, destroyed cities is going to be the main thing leading us to this villain. So I think you absolutely don't want to do it in the first issue of an arc. That's my first and last issues of the arc are like my hard rules. Like, the beginning and end, leave alone. Don't fuck with the beginning or end, unless they're like intertwined in it in an interesting way. Like, maybe it's like, oh, we're having this final battle, and because of how focused they are on winning the battle, they're going to piss off one of their fellow soldiers, and that one's going to storm off, and that's going to end up being a villain later on. That could happen in your climax. That's fine, because it's within that story. If it's something that is not within the confines of your setup or payoff, do not put it in the beginning or end of your arc. Outside of that, I think you're pretty open to do it anywhere else. Yeah, maybe the penultimate is a little bit dicey, but I think you can kind of... I'm interested to hear what you think, because I agree, this is fully, I think, subjective. But that's my... as long as you avoid the bookends, you're good.
Yeah, I think that I pretty whole cloth agree with you, because obviously in the very start of your thing, you want to focus on the villain that you're about to deal with, so you don't want to divert people's attentions to this other person. Like, you can maybe have Easter eggs or something if you're like really excited about your villain. Like, you know, maybe the first time they encounter your first villain, they're in a city that was destroyed by your second villain. But
Yeah.
like there shouldn't be like actual plot hooks
Yeah.
for your new villain. And I think that it's rough if you are doing like, if we're, you know, charting it across a 4-beat structure, it's tough if you're doing it over like a very small number of issues, because then everything needs to like really tie together. Like if we're
Yeah.
looking specifically at comic books, if you're doing multiple villains, you want to have some stretch in your
Oh
story,
yeah.
especially if it's a periphery
But even if you have
villain.
stretch, you might still be doing 4-issue arcs. Like that's
For sure,
becoming
for
more and
sure.
more common. You
But
know, I think 6 is much nicer and allows you to do a lot more. And then you can really go like in issue 3, nobody's gonna care if you do a little side quest to set up your next villain. That's cool. That's chill.
yeah, but I think you don't really want them to be, if they're going to be present in the story, like if they're going to interact with the main character, you don't want them to be even close to their like most villainous form.
Yeah.
Like you if there's any sort of sense of like, well, why didn't our heroes just take care of them back there? It'll feel really rough.
Yeah.
I think, to go back to Avatar,
It's a
Jet
good
is a really great
example.
example of that,
Yeah.
where it's like when they meet Jet, he's like, you know, very complicated. He's gonna flood a town to fuck with the Fire Nation.
Complicated man who wants to commit mass murder to civilians.
Look, yeah, but he's very much like, he's not so important that the characters need to like fully 180 from their
Oh
quest.
yeah.
Like he's not, you know, if Jet then became like a Fire Lord level threat, it could very much be like a, oh well, you know, they saw the groundwork there, what the fuck. Instead, he's like, you know, a complicated character who they have conflict with and,
Yeah.
you know, conflicted feelings about. But he's not enough of a threat to like distract them. I feel like that's
Yeah.
kind of the level of villainy you can get away with
Yeah.
when you're dealing with someone who's not your main villain. If so, that means that if this person is going to become your main villain, they can't be, you know, for funsies drowning a town. Like Jet was morally complicated, and they saved the town. And Jet, like, I think he like agreed to not drown people anymore. Um, if I remember correctly, it's been a while. But
Yeah, I
they don't
remember
have to
that.
worry about him
I remember actually how
anymore
that episode ended.
because he
They
comes
ended
back to
up like
Bossing Say,
yeah, that they
doesn't
end
he?
up on like
Yeah,
the
just seems
refugee boat to
yeah.
Ba Sing Se. I don't
Yeah, so
remember
they're like,
how
we're not going to
we get
drown
there.
cities anymore. Um,
Yeah.
so they don't have to worry about that. But if your character is like doing clearly evil things, they have to be defeated. And,
Yeah.
you know, that could
But there's
be.
also, I mean, I'll throw out the thing of, like your character can be concerned about them, but like there's always the sense of like they're not actively doing a thing, and so your hero can't
Mhm.
intervene. Of like
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
lay the groundwork of like, oh, I know this guy wants to destroy half the world, but also he went into hiding, and I'm gonna be ready for it, but I can't do anything because I can't find him. I'm not
Mhm.
this dude's like smart and he can keep himself hit. They can do stuff
Yeah.
like that too, like a thing where there's nothing for your character to do currently until it
Yeah.
pops
Yeah.
back up.
I guess the important thing is that your character shouldn't have had the chance to defeat
And
your
choose to
next
do nothing.
villain
Yeah,
and
yeah,
choose not to.
yeah,
Whether they were duped or the villain grew in power or whatever it is, you
yeah.
don't want to have, you know, them going after evil king and them interact with the evil emperor and be like,
I had to
evil
be the king
king.
first.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, dude, you are the Arc 2 villain. I can't deal with you until I do the Arc 1
Yes.
villain. Understand how storytelling works. Come on.
Exactly. So you don't want to play your hand too much with your Arc 2 villain if they're going to interact with
Yeah.
your heroes. If they're not interacting with your heroes, I think that you
Go buck
can,
wild.
yeah, you can go absolutely buck wild. I think it's an important thing to really play with moderation, though,
Yeah.
because you don't want to. And this worries me specifically with the like treating your villain like the protagonist angle. It's something you have to be really careful with, that you're not dedicating, you know, 8 pages of your 24
Oh
page
yeah.
book to your villain. Like they they can have some like little stings in there and some little pages of development. But you really have to be careful, especially if it's someone the characters haven't met yet or don't particularly care about. Like we talked about for weeks on end or months on end, how the Pigman plot was like kind of the least interesting thing that was going on in Void Rivals. So it was always kind of like, okay, yeah, and he's doing something. Let me get back to Derek and Delilah.
Yeah.
So you have to be really careful, and I think that classic like villain writing is that the less you show of your villain, the scarier they are, because like you don't see their full potential.
Yeah, you don't want to see them like sitting in their office before they decide to destroy the city. You want to get that like 2 pages of them destroying a city, everybody terrified, and then move on.
Yes, yeah. So I think that those are good ways to employ those different types of layered villains.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts on kind
I
of
have
the
no
ways
thoughts.
he has no thoughts
I don't
on
think.
the
I don't
ways
think.
that multiple villains impact stories? I know that it's
I think it's tough
deeply
for me.
rough.
Like, yeah, I think you're gonna
Yeah,
do it.
I think it's deeply rough in the comic space to bank on having
Yeah.
enough time to deal with multiple villains. So the more common one for most people is going to be the kind of big bad, bigger, worse
Yeah.
type of setup, because then it's all kind of part of the same story going on.
Yeah.
But like if you're a webtoon creator or
That's
something
what I
and
was thinking.
you've
Like,
got
yeah.
all of this space in front of you and you do kind of have like it's kind of the new ongoing to do web comics,
Yeah.
uh, and you have that space to go, then doing things that like kind of cut away to these other villains is really exciting, and it creates all of this tension and anticipation, and is a really fun way to keep people bought into your story. Like Jay was saying, no easy exit point.
No.
Because
Don't
the thing
want to
is,
get
from a
stuck.
business point of view, that's obviously good, but also from like a narrative point of view, that's good. You don't want people to
Yeah.
feel like your story is over if your story isn't over.
Yeah, you don't want it to be like, oh, the story's over, and then you're just telling another story that's like the same. Like, no, your
Mhm.
story should be intertwined to the point where if you get lucky enough that one day you have a big collected edition of all this shit that you do, somebody reading it through isn't going to go like, oh, and there's that story done, and now I get to read another story, and then there's that story. Like, no, you want them to read and be like, God damn, I just spent 2 weeks reading like this awesome giant story.
Yeah.
Now,
But
again,
that being
tough in
said,
the
I
comics.
think that it also comes with a warning of we've talked about this when talking about
Easy
I think
entry
writing
points.
endings. Easy entry point, sure, but you don't want to bank on having that arc
Oh yeah.
too. So
No.
like if you're putting together a book and you don't know if you're going to be able to keep going, or you think that there's like a lot of doubt about whether or not you'll be able to keep going, then that could just be wasted page space.
Yeah.
So you gotta be careful when you're deciding to add in multiple villains, and it's also something that you, like we said, anytime kind of in that middle chunk of your story, you can start the runway for that villain. So if by issue 3 your book is a runaway hit and you're selling great and doing much better than you thought you were going to, then you can start laying that track for that extra villain. So it's a dangerous thing to do if you don't have if you don't have control over how much you're
If
going
you're
to be
not if you're
able to
not
make.
sitting there like Jeff Lemire guaranteed to get however many freaking
Yeah,
issues of Minor Arcana is going to be.
exactly.
Um, it's a tougher thing. But again, web comics. If you sit there and you're like, I know that I can do 40 chapters of this web comic based on like the funds in the team or whatever that I have, or
Mhm. Doing it
especially if
yourself.
you're an artist and you're sitting there and you're like, I draw this. I know that I draw a chapter a month, and I'm just going to do that as long as I want to tell this story. Like, great. Set the
Yeah.
groundwork. Do what you want to do. That's great. But it's certainly important to be cognizant of the realism of situations,
Mhm.
because you don't want to be sitting there with your 3 issues of your 50 issue epic, and then it gets canceled, and now you're trying to sell that to people as like a finished thing of like, hey, I did 3 issues of this thing years ago, and then you sell somebody else like, this is like the first beat of a plot, and you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, oof.
Oof. But that is going to take us to a close on the Creator Corner this week. Uh,
Yes.
Drop a comment whether you think Jay is the mini boss or I am the mini boss, and who of us is the bigger worse. Because frankly, We'll argue about it off pod.
I don't feel the need to say anything. I know what people are gonna say. I feel confident.
I do too. I wonder if it's confident in the same direction. Or if we're just both treating each other as the mini boss. And we're like, yes. Everyone will think that Jay is the mini boss. Everyone will think that Katie is the mini boss.
I feel confident. Anyway, Katie, why don't you tell people what we had going on and what?
Yes, this past Saturday was our Strange Saturday Super Show. We read one of the weirder things we've done for the Strange Saturday, which is saying something. It's the Strange Saturday. We read No Holds Barred, where basically Batman but Shakespeare.
Yeah,
as
Shakespeare is the
Shakespeare
bard.
is the bard, who is an Elizabethan era vigilante, clearly parodying Batman.
Specifically, like the '66 Batman.
yeah. It's goofy as all hell, incredibly weird, and was super fun to talk about. But that was last weekend. This coming weekend, we have the 4th installment of our Absolute Universe Fantasy Football draft tournament, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be our full recap of Absolute Batman, Absolute Wonder Woman, and Absolute Superman, as well as our janky little homebrew criteria for a essentially fantasy football for comics.
Yep.
Be sure to check that out for all things Absolute Universe. Jay, what else is going on?
Well, we did all of our best of the year top 10 videos last month. There's a playlist with all of those, so if you still have not checked those out somehow, it was a lot of fun. You should watch them. And every Saturday morning, 9 to 11 Eastern, we are streaming Marvel Rivals. So if you enjoy Marvel Rivals and you enjoy us somehow, then you should join us for that. But as always, we have our main episode coming up next Wednesday. Katie, what are we reviewing on that?
Yeah, we are going to be talking about Batgirl number 4, the at long last conclusion of Batman Offworld with number 6.
Yeah.
We're going to have Living Hell number 3, Two-Face number 3, and a brand new number 1 from Mike Mignola, Frankenstein New World. I believe this is in the like Hellboy BPRD universe.
Yeah.
Like I think Frankenstein is an established character in it. So we'll see if this is a way that you can jump in. We'll test the waters for you.
Yeah, I think a lot of Hellboy universe stuff is very good at being approachable. Yeah, so I'm excited. It should be fun.
Me too.
But hopefully you'll join us for that. And if so, we'll see you next week. Comic Geeks.